Everyone, this is Ben Colby, teen librarian at Enoch Pratt, with a part one video for creating a Space Blaster game. Here I am in arcade.makecode.com, and I'm going to just create a new project. And I'm just going to call this Space Blaster. And I'll come up with a blank thing here. So the idea is we're going to have a player ship flying around, shooting at the enemies that come onto the screen. And for today, we're just going to create the basic mechanics and have life and game over condition. So the first thing I'm going to do is go over to sprites, create, set my sprite to. This is the command we use to create a sprite. I'm just going to give it a new name. Let's just say new variable. This is going to be called player ship. And here I have this thing that if I click on it, it brings up a graphics editor. So I can create the graphics for the ship just by dragging stuff. And I'm just going to try to make it look nice here. Just use a mix of colors. And I don't want to use black, by the way, because the background is black. Okay, well, it's a little off-center. That's okay. This is good. So now you can see as soon as the program refreshes, maybe I have to hit play, my ship is going to appear in the middle. Oh, there it is. Great. Let's move it around. So I go over to controller, and it's the first thing, move my sprite with buttons. So I'm just going to go right after that, move player ship with buttons. And if I hit that plus, I get the actual velocity. So let's see how fast that is. There's a velocity in the X direction and the Y direction. That's fine. I can deal with that movement. And you'll notice I can actually go off the screen. So let's fix that right now. Under sprites, I scroll down and I find set my sprite to stay in screen. And let's just make sure we pick the right sprite. Set player ship to stay in screen. So now when I try to go off the edge, I cannot. Great. What do we do next? Let's fire some missiles. So what do we do to fire missiles? I want to hit the space bar, which is the same as hitting the A key. So under controller, I'm going to say on A pressed. We are going to fire the missile. So under sprites, I scroll down to projectiles. And it's the first one, set projectile to projectile from sprite. And I'm going to call the projectile something new. It's going to be called missile. And we're going to change the graphics of the missile. The ship is a 16 by 16 grid. I want the missile to be a lot smaller. I'm going to change it down to a 4 by 4 grid here. And then just put some random stuff in. Maybe a diagonal pattern. That's pretty good. All right. So the projectile is coming from player ship. And so now when I move around and I hit the space bar, now I'm shooting these projectiles. They're all going down and to the right. Why? Because that's what we told it to do with the velocity here. 50 in the X direction, meaning going to the right. I actually don't want the missile to go to the right at all. So I'm going to change that to 0. And then in the Y direction, we want it to go a lot faster. We want it to go faster than the ship is moving. The ship is moving at 100, so let's say 200. So what happens now? We're firing, except it's in the wrong direction. I was hoping to go up. That's because the Y direction in Make Code Arcade is pointing down. So if we want something to shoot up, it has to be a negative velocity. Let's see what that looks like. Much better. Cool, let's get some enemies on the board that we can shoot at. So we want to do this on a timer. If we want to do anything on a timer, we have a block right here that says game update every so often. This is set to 500 milliseconds by default, or half a second. There's 1,000 milliseconds in a second. So every half a second, we are going to spawn an enemy. And I guess we would just use the same one right up here, set my sprite. And so instead of my sprite, this one is called enemy ship, and it's already in my list because I was just working with that in the last one. But you may have to create a new variable. Set enemy ship to sprite with a picture. Well, what's the enemy ship look like? Let's create the picture. Getting there. I'm going to add some red. Not bad. So now as the game updates, you can see that it's creating those ships right in the middle. So instead of putting them in the middle, we want to change their position now. Set the position. And that's under sprites, set position to X and Y. All right, so set enemy ship position. Well, in the Y direction, okay, yeah, if I set the position to 0, 0, it's in the top left. The Y position, I like it at 0. I want it to stay at the top. X position, I want the ships to spawn anywhere across the top randomly. We generate random numbers under math, this thing called pick random. So I'm going to drag that into the X part. So we're going from anywhere from 0 to 10 pixels. Apparently that's how far that is. I don't want to have to figure out how far across the screen is, so I'm going to use this other block under scene, which says screen width. That's the first one. So we're going to pick an X position from 0 to the screen width, and now you can see those things are spawning randomly across the top. They still aren't moving, so let's give them some movement. Set velocity. Right here under physics. So we set enemy ship velocity, and now you can see they're all going down and to the left, just like before. So what do we want the X velocity to be? I want it to be random. I want it to be shooting to the left or right randomly, which means we could have a negative or positive velocity. I'm going to take this from minus 20 to plus 20. And it should update right away if you want to see what's going on. Yep. So now they're kind of drifting left and right slightly. Let's make them drift a little more. I'm going to go minus 30 to plus 30. And then what about the Y velocity? I also want that to have a random element to it. So I'm going to copy this random thing and I'm going to put it in here. Except this time, the Y velocity, well, if it's 0, it's going to stay exactly where it is. If it's negative, it's going to go up. And if it's positive, it'll go down. I always want the ships to go down toward me, I think. So I'm going to start, let's say it has to be faster than the ship, maybe? Yeah. So, or it can be faster than the ship. Let's say it's a random speed of 80 to 120 if the ship is moving at 100. That's pretty good. Those are some things I can fire at. Now you notice nothing is happening when I hit them, and also nothing is happening when I crash into them yet. So we're just about to add that. Oh, one more thing I want to add. Under sprites, we have these effects. and one of them is bounce on wall. Set my sprite to bounce on wall. Let's do that for the ship also. Set enemy ship to bounce on wall on. So now they will never leave. They will just bounce around forever on the screen, and you'll have to shoot and kill them. And I think they're moving too fast, actually, now that I see that. I'm going to slow them down in this direction, 60 to 100. That's a little better. 60 to 80. 60 to 80. I don't want this to be too hard right away. We can speed it up later. Okay. So now everything is stuck on the screen. Let's start talking about life and points. Anytime you're going to use any kind of variable, such as life or points, you want to get them started at the very beginning in the start menu. So in my start menu, I can move this off to the side. I'm going to set my life to 3, and I'm going to set my initial score to 0. And you can see I just got some stuff popping up with life and score. So how do we change those things? We're going to do overlaps. So if I scroll down in the sprite menu to overlaps, what this is saying, if any sprite at any time of the player type overlaps with any sprite of another type, then something happens. So in this case, I'm looking for the condition where the enemy sprite overlaps with the projectile, because you'll remember we created, when we were pressing the space bar, a projectile from the ship. So when the projectile overlaps with the enemy sprite, then something happens, and that's what this command is saying. So what happens? We destroy the sprite, which is under Effects, under Sprite. Destroy. We have to pick the right one here. We have to drag one of these two things over. And the reason this is different than just picking which one to destroy is that this could happen for anything of that type. It's a general case. So we're going to destroy the enemy sprite, which is this one, with an effect. I like the fire effect. For half a second is fine. So let's see what that looks like. So if I shoot it, it's not working. If sprite of kind enemy overlaps sprite of kind projectile, then we destroy the enemy sprite with a fire effect. Why isn't it working? Well, we'll come back to it. We'll figure it out. This is normal. The other thing we need to do when that happens, when we hit the thing, is destroy the projectile. We don't want the projectile to pierce through. And that would be this other one, which I just dragged over. And we're going to change our score by 1, which I just found under info, meaning we increase the score by 1. Yes, so let's see if we made any difference here. We're overlapping, but it's not destroying the thing. Okay, hold on. So, what is going on? On sprite of kind enemy, and this is true anytime. Did I declare? Oh, here's the problem. I found it. When I created the enemy ship, I created it of kind player. I have to create it of kind enemy before this is going to work. Now it'll work. Cool. So now when I hit the ships, they blow up. They catch on fire for a second and blow up, and then they disappear. And the projectile that hits them disappears. But you'll notice when I crash into the ships, nothing happens. So let's add something else to happen when we crash. So that would be a different kind of overlap. I'm just going to use the same overlap block and just put it off to the side, I suppose. Oops. If a sprite of kind player overlaps a sprite of kind enemy. Well, what do we do then? Let's destroy the enemy. We don't necessarily destroy the player. I drag this over. And I guess it doesn't matter if we have an effect or not. We don't really need it. It just needs to go away. And we are going to change our life by -1. When life hits 0, it's an automatic game over. So let me see how this works. Looks like it's working great. So I've already been hit twice, you can see, and now if I get hit, yep, it's great. Let's try it one more time. So I'm shooting, and I crash, and I crash, and I crash. That's great. That is exactly how it should work. So whatever your score is, when you crash, it'll be displayed. Okay, are we done with stage 1? We created a player ship. We set our initial life. We set our initial score. When we press the A button, which is also the space bar, we created a missile from the ship. We have a game update on a timer where we create the enemy in a random position on the top of the screen. We also are giving it some parameters for velocity that control how it moves, and we're making it bounce on the wall. Then we have 2 overlap conditions. If an enemy sprite overlaps a projectile sprite, we do these things. If a player sprite overlaps an enemy sprite, we do these things. There's one more thing I want to do, and that is to add a screen effect, which I think is under scene. Yes. Yeah, so I want that to not keep playing. Under scene, under effects, I can start a screen effect. Let's do that at the very beginning when we start the program. I'll just pop it at the end of the start loop. We are going to start a screen. Starfield is really nice. I've seen that one before. And it'll just go forever unless you tell it a certain amount of time. So let's see what that Starfield looks like. And I'm going to actually maximize this. Looks super cool. I don't know if I would say that this game is done, but we are definitely pretty far along. And this is something you could play and share with people. So I'm just going to look at everything very slowly to finish, just in case you need to take one more look at it. And that's it. And then in the next stage, we are going to add some animations, and we're going to add more complexity. The end.